Now, with the amount of information that was pouring in to the two of you, what you've done is you've broken up scenes of great action with scenes of Magistrate Nair, for instance, giving us his background. We've all forgotten the bail hearing because that was dramatic enough. And the bail hearing kind of set the tone in many ways for what was to come. I was in Pretoria doing an outside broadcast on the day the trial started, but we'd already had those scenes of mayhem outside the court, and it was for the bail hearing, which seemed to go on forever and ever and ever.
That level of media interest during the bail application was unprecedented. You know, for the 3 days after the shooting happened, in the EWN newsroom, we were literally picking up and putting down phones for 3 days, doing crossings with international news agencies because of the level of interest. At court, over that bail application week, it was complete mayhem. We have never experienced interest in a story like we experienced then. And don't forget, with Desmond Nair, the magistrate who handed down the judgment in the bail application, that judgment was taken live on international news networks for almost 3 hours. That was how interested people were. And after the judgment, I went knocking on Magistrate Nair's door and asked him for an interview, and he agreed. And we've got quite an extensive interview with him in the book, which is just fascinating insight into what was he thinking when those cameras were rolling? How did he deal with that media interest and flocks of journalists who were sitting in the passage outside his office asking to broadcast the trial live? How did he decide on whether or not to grant Oscar Pistorius bail or not? And he's been very candid and very open about it, which is highly unusual in South Africa, to have a judicial officer who's willing to sit down with you and give opinion on, not so much on the merits of the case, because he can't speak to the merits, but on the experience, really, of what he had to do.
Well, I wonder whether Judge Matsipa is ever going to do that. She seems to me to be very, very proper, very controlled, and all of that. Barry actually physically getting into the court, because, you know, every now and then I'd see you, and if you had another arm, and if you were an octopus, there would be another machine attached to you, because you were talking to us, you were probably talking to other networks, you were tweeting, you were making notes as well, because obviously everybody knew there were books that were going to come out of this from different points of view. How did you manage to actually get a seat? Once you had a seat, was it yours forever and ever and ever, and you could throw somebody out if they sat in yours, like Deborah Patter, for instance? She has to be controlled.
Much respect to the...
I must say, she stole my seat during judgment,
Oh,
then she gave it back to me, yes.
Much respect to the Justice Department when it came down to the actual trial, because they had managed to sort out an accreditation process. But if we can just go back to those first few days of the bail application, and I laugh about it every time because somebody asks, what was it like? I've never had to elbow a fellow colleague in the face to try and get through a door to get into my own court in Pretoria. It doesn't happen. But this is how crazy it was. We were bunched up outside. People were swearing at each other.
At one point, a CNN cameraman hit me over the head with his camera by accident, and Barry Rue, bless him, tried to save me from falling over on the floor. He ran to assist me, and the cameramen weren't interested in his assistance.
At the trial, the Justice Department, I mean, it's fantastically organized between SANEF and the Foreign Correspondents Association, and we had accreditation to get in. There were limited seats, but once we all managed to find our spots, every day we returned to our own spot. And you can imagine at the beginning it was quite hectic. There were a lot of people trying to get in. But 3 weeks into the trial, and particularly after Oscar had testified, the interest waned. He was going to be the big draw card. So, you know, the benches would become less full and we'd become more comfortable. But then we'd come down to closing argument. And those that stayed on, like myself, and I had a bunch of foreign correspondents with me, and from the BBC and Sky and all the rest of it, all those guys parachuting in just for the thing, we made sure they were going to sit at the back.
Yes.
You know, this is our spot. You're not going to come in here after being away for weeks. And but we established relationships. It was, you know, in that sense, we worked hard. It was long hours for everybody. I mean, the international guys, time differences. We do our loft crossing maybe at about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. These guys have to sit up outside court because they've got outside broadcasting vans till midnight to cross to their countries who are having just morning shows over on the other side of the world. So incredible work being done in court.
you were sitting in court and you were working, and I understand that there's a difference between work and between people like myself who have no knowledge really of how the court works, and I wasn't writing a book. But there must have been some scenes that came through to you whilst Mandy was breastfeeding at that stage, and watching very, very closely, I have to say, but not from the court. But there must have been some scenes where you must have thought, am I hearing things correctly? Or were you horrified at what you were hearing? Or was that not part of what you were about during that trial? Because some of it was extraordinarily complex as well.
I think there's a level of fascination that you know, this isn't the first court case I've covered. It's certainly not the first crime case I've covered. Peel away the celebrity aspect, peel away the Oscar Pistorius, and we deal with an accused, a man who is accused of murdering his girlfriend. But certainly with that interest that came with it, and the person you are dealing with, I think perhaps the most eye-opening part came, and this is what everybody was waiting for, and I said it a minute ago, Oscar Pistorius. I think that's what everyone was waiting for, to hear what happened in that house that morning from the man himself. And I think, and of course, I don't think anybody could quite have anticipated what Gerrie Nel was going to do in his opening salvo. I mean, I don't think anybody, the zombie stopper line of questioning and putting Reeva Steenkamp's blown open head on a screen for everyone to see and asking the accused, I mean, that was just jaw-dropping. But there was strategy involved in that, and we discussed it in the book as well. There was a very particular, there was a plan there. And so we watched that with amazement. But again, you can't, it's interesting, we come out of there and you've got to try and remember everything you've heard, because you're busy doing so many things. You're typing, you're taking notes, and you're listening. It's quite something.
Oscar himself, there was a stage where I, you know, listening to it and occasionally speaking to the journalists involved, I actually thought, I think he's a suicide risk. He was so vulnerable. And when he apologized to Reeva's parents right at the very beginning of that, and you listened to the emotion in his voice, and then it just seemed to go emotionally downhill actually from there on. Were there not concerns about Oscar lasting the course? Well, I'm not saying that he would have killed himself, but I'm just saying his ability to answer questions.
Well, he did have his personal psychiatrist, or psychologist rather, in court with him to support him. Oscar Pistorius has tremendous support from his family. His brother, Carl, was there almost every day until his unfortunate accident. His sister, Emma, was there every single day. His uncles, they were there to assist him. And when he finally went for that assessment, the psychological assessment, you're not far off. They did find there's potential for suicide here. However, his strong family support and his religious belief in religion would mitigate that. So you're quite right. There was concerns, and the judge was cognizant of that. She was, whenever there was the sign, and this is important for her role as the judicial officer there, to ensure that the accused, the person sitting in the box, is fully comprehensive of what is happening. So that's why she was very aware of what was happening, and he wouldn't have allowed it to continue if he wasn't in a state to continue.